Chapter 15. Curtain Call. George held her breath as Nancy began speaking her lines. Mr. Spencer, taking the part of Bob Simpson, gave no sign that he was either pleased or displeased with Nancy's performance. Whenever there was a scene between the leading lady and another girl character, he called Bess to read the lines. "But don't do any acting," he said. George, now seated in the auditorium, kept her fingers crossed. She noticed that the only time Mr. Spencer stopped Nancy was to drill her on stage directions. Nancy spoke the lines without once forgetting them, and imitated Tammy's movements to a point where George at times could hardly keep from chuckling. The rehearsal went on and on. Presently, an idea came to George. She left the theater, but returned about 20 minutes later. She was smiling and saying to herself, "Nancy will certainly be surprised." Presently, Mr. Spencer said he wouldn't need Bess to read the lines any longer, so she came down to sit beside George. In a few moments, the two girls quietly went out together. Nancy thought, "They've gone to cook supper, I'll bet." She herself felt a slight twinge of hunger, but she was too excited about the rehearsal to pay further attention to it. "I suppose I should give you a breather," said Mr. Spencer finally. "Nancy, I didn't want to say anything before, but now I will admit to you that I am absolutely amazed at your ability. I had heard that you performed very well in school plays, but I had no idea you could do this well." Nancy smiled. "Don't forget, I've been watching Tammy intently and trying to imitate her." "Well, you've certainly done a remarkable job. Now, if you're ready, I'd like to go over the scene where you're seated on the couch reading a letter and Bob Simpson comes in unexpectedly to bring bad news. Please be very intent while reading the letter. Then, as you become aware of his entrance, start to rise and let the letter flutter to the floor." As Nancy crossed the stage toward the couch, she thought, "That's not the way Tammy does the scene. Mr. Spencer must think his way is better. I wonder if her personal interest in Bob made her interpret the scene differently." Nancy went through the lines and motions exactly as she had been directed, and Mr. Spencer smiled his approval. "Please be sure to do it just that way tonight. It was perfect." 3 more short scenes were rehearsed. Then Mr. Spencer looked at his watch. "My, it's 7 o'clock, he said in amazement. "Nancy, will you please take a warm shower to relax, have a short rest period, then eat a very light supper. Tell Margot I'll be in shortly." Nancy delivered the message, then went to the second floor. Surprised to find that Bess and George were not around, she returned to the kitchen to ask Margot where they were. "I don't know," the actress replied, "but I did see them go off in your car." Wondering where the cousins had gone, Nancy returned to her bedroom, took a shower, and lay down for 20 minutes. Then she went to the kitchen. After eating a sandwich and drinking a cup of tea, Nancy went over to the theater. Bess and George still had not returned. Where could they be? Nancy wondered. The cousins, meanwhile, had hurried to the River Heights airport. George, thinking that Nancy's father and Mr. Gruen, and also Ned Nickerson, would like to see the performance that evening, had telephoned Mr. Drew. Then she had called the camp where Ned, Bert Eddleton, who was her own favorite date, and Dave Evans were counselors. All of them told her they would like to see the show. The boys would come by plane. "I hope it's on time," Bess fidgeted as they sat waiting. "We'll just about get back to the theater in time for the curtain." Over a loudspeaker, they heard the plane's arrival being announced. The girls hurried to the gate, ready to whisk the boys off as soon as they came through it. Ned and his friends, realizing what a tight schedule they had to meet, ran all the way from the plain to the gate. "Hi!" 5 voices said at the same time, and everyone laughed. "The car's over here," George explained, leading the way. The trio of college boys formed a most attractive group. Ned, tall and athletic, with brown hair and blue eyes. Bert, blonde and a little shorter than Ned. And Dave, rangily built with dark hair and green eyes. "So Nancy's trying to solve another mystery, with the help of you girls," Ned said, as the car spun along the road. "It's a weird one this time," George answered. "But I don't know how much we're supposed to tell, so perhaps we should wait and let Nancy do it." "Fine thing," Bert complained. "After all the help we fellows have given Nancy on other mysteries." "Yes," Dave added. "Think of all the miles we've traveled, and you won't even let us in on the excitement." Bess and George knew they were being teased, but still refused to divulge any details about the mystery of the dancing puppet. When the young people walked into the theater, Mr. Drew and Hannah Gruen were already there in seats next to those for the newcomers. Greetings were quickly exchanged. "Shh," George whispered. "Curtain time." Mr. Spencer was walking out to the footlights. He announced that Tammi Whitlock was suffering with laryngitis and would be unable to play her part that evening. "The Footlighters are very fortunate in having obtained the services of Nancy Drew." As the curtain went up, Bess and George glanced around the theater to see what the reaction was to the change in leading ladies. Some of the audience looked surprised. Others frowned. The girls felt that many residents of River Heights had heard what an excellent actress Tammy was, and had purchased tickets just to see her. But as the play progressed, the applause for Nancy between acts became very genuine. The young sleuth seemed to have become inspired with the part. Bess and George were seated together, with their dates on either side of them. Bess now whispered to her cousin, "I'm glad Nancy isn't overplaying the love scenes with Bob Simpson the way Tammy does." George suppressed a chuckle. "But look at Ned's face," she whispered. Ned Nickerson sat with a grim jaw and eyes straight ahead. He leaned forward slightly in his seat as Bob kissed Nancy. When the scene was over, he heaved a sigh and sat back, drumming his fingers on the chair arms. As the final curtain came down, the applause was thunderous. All the members of the cast had played their roles unusually well, hoping to support Nancy in the best way they could. There was curtain call after curtain call, with Nancy and Bob Simpson commanding a major share of the crowd's enthusiasm. Mr. Drew was among those who were clapping the loudest. Hannah Gruen's eyes were moist. "I didn't know Nancy was that good," said Dave. "Boy, she ought to make the stage her career." "And give up sleuthing?" Bess exclaimed. "She wouldn't do it in a million years." As soon as the audience began to leave, Bess and George took the others to the house. Nancy, waylaid several times and offered congratulations, had not yet taken off her Civil War costume nor her wig. Suddenly she saw her father and Mrs. Gruen, who promptly hugged her. Then, over Hannah's shoulder, she saw Ned, Bert, and Dave. "Well, for goodness sake," she cried. "Oh, it's wonderful to see you. How in the world did you get here?" "Flew in at George's invitation," Ned said quickly. "Nancy, you were simply great. I didn't have time to pick up a bouquet for you, but you deserve it. About 5 dozen red roses." After Bert and Dave had congratulated Nancy, Ned went on, "I think this calls for a celebration. How about all of us going out somewhere together?" "Thank you," said Hannah Gruen, "but I think I'd better return home." Mr. Drew also said he should get to bed since he had to be up very early the next day. Nancy was silent. "Well, how about it?" Ned asked her. She blushed, then said she was greatly embarrassed. Bob Simpson had asked her to go out with him, and she had accepted. Bob had just come from his dressing room and overheard the conversation. He walked up, smiling. "I couldn't help overhearing what you said, Nancy. I know these fellows have come a long distance. I'll be glad to step aside. That is, if you'll give me a rain check." Suddenly an idea came to Nancy. "Ned, do you and Bert and Dave have to go back tonight?" "Yes, we do." "Then I have a suggestion. We girls will have to drive you out to the airport, and it will be late coming back alone." She smiled at Bob. "It might be good for us to have a male escort." The leading man grinned. "Well, if you insist. But how about my finding me a date? Maybe I can talk Kathy into going." "Swell idea," said Ned. Bob had seen Kathy leaving the house alone. Now he rushed after her and was just in time to invite her to go with the group. The two came back together, and Kathy appeared to be delighted. "I'm honored to be included in the celebration for our new leading lady," she said. Nancy laughed. "I assure you this is only temporary. As soon as Tammy gets her voice back, I'll stick to painting scenery." "You'll do nothing of the kind," said Kathy. "I don't mind telling you that Tammy and I aren't the best of friends. I wish you'd keep the part." Kathy went into Nancy's dressing room with her and helped her change into street clothes. "It's too bad that you and Tammy don't get along," said Nancy. "I'm going to ask you a very blunt question. Is it because of Bob Simpson?" Kathy nodded. "Tammy is absolutely hateful to me. Of course, you've already guessed she's crazy about Bob, but I certainly didn't take him away from her. If he wants to date me, why shouldn't he? Nancy, do you know that Tammy actually threatened me?" "Threatened you? In what way?" Nancy asked her. Kathy said that Tammy had forbidden her to make dates with Bob. She said if I did, she'd see to it that I never got another part in a play. "You didn't take her seriously?" Nancy asked. "I tried not to," Kathy replied. "But she gets me so upset I forget lines and never do my best when she's around. One night I actually cried because of what she'd said." Nancy put a hand on Kathy's shoulder. "You must try hard not to pay any attention to Tammy. I admit I don't understand that girl myself." Kathy said she felt better and was sure her acting would improve from now on. "I won't let Tammy get me down, either on the stage or in real life," she said firmly. As the girls left the dressing room, Mr. Spencer came up. He announced that the evening performance had gone so well that there would be no rehearsal that night for the next play. The young people climbed into Bob's station wagon. "Where to, ladies?" Ned asked. Nancy, her mind reverting to the unsolved incident of the stolen necklace at the Green Acres restaurant, suggested that they go out there. "They have a good dance band and a young singer named Chuck Grant. I think you'll like the place." George chuckled. "Last time we girls were there, we didn't go inside. Nancy and I thought we had nabbed a couple of thieves, but the loot wasn't on them." "One thing is sure," said Bess. "Those two suspects won't dare show up there again." "Why not?" Nancy countered. "So far, they've proven their innocence to the authorities, and they don't suspect I recognized one of them by the scar when he stopped my car." Ned gave Nancy a searching look. "Something tells me you still suspect them of the theft. Am I right in guessing that you think they may have had a confederate in the restaurant, and that's why the necklace wasn't found on them?" Nancy laughed. "Mind reader!" When they entered the restaurant, the head waiter showed the group to a table at the edge of the dance floor. Soon the four couples were enjoying the lively dance rhythms. After a slight intermission, the band returned to the platform. This time, Chuck Grant came on stage and sang. As soon as he finished, Chuck stepped down from the platform and came directly to Nancy's table. "You're Nancy Drew, aren't you?" he asked. When Nancy nodded, the singer went on. "I hear you were absolutely terrific in the show tonight." Nancy looked amazed. "Thank you," she said, smiling. "Where did you hear that?" "From several guests who have come in since the performance," he replied. "I think I ought to warn you. Tammi Whitlock is not going to like the report. She's a firebrand when she's jealous." Nancy laughed. Tammy has nothing to worry about. Her role is waiting for her whenever she can come back to take it. Then, wishing to change the subject, Nancy asked, "Where'd you learn to sing so well?" "California," Chuck Grant replied. Nancy recalled that Tammy came from California. "Then you knew Tammy out there?" she inquired. Chuck Grant threw back his head and laughed heartily. "I'll say I did. Don't you know who she is?" End of chapter 15.